Hey guys, so first up is I'm going to teach y'all about the different watercolor materials that I have. So here I have XL mixed media and XL watercolor paper. So the mixed media paper, it's meant for all kinds of different things, not just watercolor, so it's not going to be as thick, and the texture is going to look a little bit different than my cold press XL watercolor paper that's actually meant for watercolor paint. As you can see, the paper is a lot thicker, and the texture is a little bit different. So up next is our paints, and here I have a Lucas Pan paint. So the thing about these paints is they're refillable. They're also called cakes, and they have a very pasty, creamy texture, unlike the bottled ones, or the tubed paints, which have a more acrylic kind of feel to them, or sometimes even liquidy. So what is watercoloring? Well, watercoloring by definition is a painting method in which the paints are made of pigments suspended in a water-based solution. And so what does this mean? It means that the materials that we're working with are highly manipulated by water, making it a type of watery effect, which gives us its name, watercolor. So watercolor back then for artists in about like Renaissance period and even before then, they didn't have the paints that we have now. We have them in pan, tube, and homemade, but most people use pan or tube, as I'm using both here, but I do prefer pan. So how it was made before it was able to be manufactured is the watercolors were made out of dry clumps of pigment, and the people would take them and rub them against stones or cement slabs until it was their desired consistency. So where did watercolors originate from? Well, it's believed that they originated from East Asia in about 4000 BC. So it was used by the Chinese, Korean, Japanese, even India and Ethiopia, but it was more of decorative. So these were either on scrolls or they were brush paintings, and they're often found in monochrome blacks or browns. So the true history of watercoloring as an actual medium pretty much dates back in the Renaissance era in Germany. So in the Renaissance era in Germany, there was an artist by the name of Durer from 1471 to 1528. For him, he painted a lot of landscaping and wildlife, but he primarily used watercolors for those, and was generally considered one of the earliest experimental painters with watercolor. Albrecht's working with the watercolor left such an inspiration that people like Hans Boll, an artist who lived from 1534 to 1593, erected an important school of watercolor painting in Germany, which was led by him. The thing is, though, the school and other artists taught watercoloring as study sketches. So there is a form of painting that is considered a cartoon, which is a smaller version of what a massive painting would be, usually of oil in those times. And watercoloring was used as a sketch. It was never completed work. It was always sketches and cartoons, or even just color sketches, color studying. The other major thing that watercolors was used for was map making, which was one of the other things that Hans taught at this school as well. The only time watercoloring was looked at as a serious medium was whenever people would use it to paint wildlife or life around them. Watercolor painting as a medium was refined, or considered refined, whenever it reached England. So it was picked up by an artist named Paul Sandby, who lived from 1730 to 1809. Sandby used the paints popularly in his creations of his maps and his landscape paintings, to which is then considered a serious art by most people, thus creating such an inspirational spark that artists like J.M.W. Turner, who took it and led it into its final levels of popularization for the newly serious medium and turning into what we know today. Now that you know a little bit about watercolor history, now you need to know how it works and how to work with it. So when painting with watercolors, obviously water is going to be its primary source. There's several different ways to start off with a watercolor painting. So you can just dip into it like normal acrylic paint, where you go straight into the paint and then straight to the canvas, which is dry painting for watercolor. Or you can use a technique called wet on wet, which is where you wash down the picture with water first, as I've done a couple times in this piece, and then you put the watercolor on top of it, which then gives it a mind of its own. When you do wash on wash, your self-control in how you use the paints and how you set it down, it kind of just does its own thing. So with watercolors, you very much have to keep in mind that anything could happen, and you kind of have to just work with it. So watercolor medium, I think, is something that is both easy and hard to work with. It's easy because for watercoloring, you can actually blend your colors together fairly simply. So if you have two different colors that you want merged together, you can just take your paint and your paintbrush and put water on the bristles, and you can just kind of paint them together softly and it'll blend. Another easy thing about watercoloring is layering. Since the paint itself is very transparent, whenever you layer it on top of something, you can see the bottom through it. So you can keep layering and layering and layering, which is something that's easy to help you from making mistakes right away if you were using something like acrylic, where it's just a straight on full opacity of paint. Another cool trick with watercoloring is that you can easily clean up a mistake you've made. So if you painted outside of your lines, or you kind of got into an area you didn't want to, you can also just take your paintbrush, dip it in water, and then run it over, and then you can press it down with a towel, as I've done a couple times here. You can do that whenever you make a mistake, or you have too much pigment in that area and you don't want that much. Another thing about watercoloring is that, as you can see here, it's usually used in mixed media. So, like as I'm doing here, I'm outlining, because watercoloring, again, is you very much lack self-control. So the edges don't look clean, and so I'm cleaning them up with an outlining pen, which is something that a lot of people do. Not everybody does it, but those are the kind of artists who you have to take a lot of time in being patient. Watercoloring is very much, you have to be very, very patient with it, because while it dries fast because it's water, it might not always do that. You may think it will, but the paper doesn't always soak it up right away. Sometimes you put down too much water, and then if you don't realize it's wet and then you go to lay down another color right next to it, they might blend together without you wanting them to. Or your color might go somewhere off its track because you didn't realize you had water there. You didn't realize it was still wet. So then this leads into why I say watercoloring is also kind of hard. It's the fact of you do have to have extensive patience for this. The matter of the fact is that you're working with extensive amounts of water, which water can get very messy at times, or it can leave your paper being soaked if you don't know what you're doing. There are moments that even I've had where I didn't realize how wet my paper was, and I go on to layer again, and the water just eats right through the paper. So then the other issue with having extensive amounts of water that you're working with is that if you don't let your piece dry, or the little area that you were just working on, and then you're impatient, you try to paint on top of it, those colors are going to blur together, and you can't exactly fix that, but you can work with it, which is something you need to learn when you're working with watercolors. You need to learn to work with it, because there may be times where you don't realize your paint's still wet and it blurs together, and then you have this new color in your painting that you didn't fully expect. Or you have a new area that's painted and you gotta work with it. So why watercoloring? Well, for me, it's just something that's really, really fun to do. So as you can see here, I'm just kind of having fun with it. So this is a technique where you water wash, and then you put heavy amounts of water soaked pigment onto the paper with it, and then it creates this just fun, energetic marbling kind of thing, where you can even blow on it and it makes this effect. And the fun in creating things like this, and just the uniqueness of it compared to the other mediums, is why I choose watercoloring.